Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the unsolved murder true crime case of Patricia and Barbara Grimes. Barbara was 15-year-old and Patricia was 13-year-old, and they lived with their mother, Loretta, and their two brothers and two sisters. The girls' mother had actually split up from the father, Joseph, so he wasn't in the family home anymore, and the children really chipped in helping the mother because obviously she was raising 4 children as a single parent in the household. So they helped out as much as they could. They were all really good children and they lived in Illinois in the US. On the 20th of December 1956, Barbara and Patricia were going to watch the film Love Me Tender. Now they'd seen this 15 times at this point, but they just loved this film. The girls were always together and they were practically inseparable, so they always loved having fun and they really enjoyed this film, so off they went to see it. They set off from the home around about 7:30 p.m. and they said that to the mother that they would be home before midnight. And then they made the journey to the Brighton Theatre, which was around 1.5 miles from their house. It was pretty much confirmed and certain that the girls did actually make it to the cinema. There was one of their friends that actually attended the same viewing as them, and she saw them watching the film. She said that she sat behind them during the first viewing. It was a double viewing that night and she left after the first one. So she doesn't know if they stayed until the second one, but they were definitely there for the first. As she was leaving, she actually saw them both queuing up for popcorn. They seemed happy, everything seemed normal. And then obviously she left with her sister. She doesn't know, of course, whether they stayed for the second because she had already left. Loretta, their mother, was waiting for them to return home at midnight like they said they would, but they never did. Loretta proceeded to send Teresa, their oldest sister of 17, and their brother Joey, who was 14 at the time, to go and wait at the bus stop where they would surely come off. The first bus arrived and the girls did not come off. It was another 2 buses that passed, so 3 buses had passed in total, and the girls had yet to return home. This is when the children decided that they were going to go home and tell the mother. And whilst the children were waiting at the bus stop, Loretta began phoning around to their friends, things like that, basically just trying to find them, see if anyone had seen them, see if anyone knew anything. When the siblings returned with no sign of the sisters, Loretta then proceeded to ring the Chicago police. At around 2:15 a.m. in the early hours of the 29th of December, Loretta reported her girls as missing. At first, I do think that the police thought the girls had run away, but the mother didn't really believe this one little bit. They were good girls. The only money that they actually had with them was to go and view the film. It was not enough to fuel them running away and be able to actually do it successfully. They also left all of the belongings at home. Why would they do this? Why would they run away with no money, no belongings? You just wouldn't. As more information came in about the girls' disappearance, it would end up becoming one of the biggest investigations in Chicago at that time. So literally within a short period of time after all this information started coming in, they were doing citywide searches. Hundreds of police officers would be sent out full time to look for them. A task force was set up. Hundreds of volunteers from the community came together to do ground searches for the girls, and door-to-door enquiries were made. Flyers were being distributed, and because of this, lots and lots of tips and sightings were coming in. Now, this did actually cause problems. People did actually start believing that the girls were travelling around the area looking for Elvis. They were a huge fan of his, and with people all over the place saying that they'd seen him, obviously it just was the first thing that came to their head. They'd gone out to see Elvis's film that night. Maybe they were travelling around trying to find him. And this actually went a bit crazy. It actually ended up with Elvis himself going on the radio and making a plea for the girls to come home. This was obviously disproven fairly quickly as the police were making a timeline of the girls with the incoming information. But wow, Elvis actually going on the radio and pleading for the girls to come home, obviously thinking that they were travelling around trying to find him, is pretty interesting to say the least. There was an absolute ton of sightings from all over the place, and most of these were disproven. It was on the 22nd of January in 1957 that a man called Leonard Prescott was driving along the road and he actually noticed something a bit strange. He initially thought that somebody had dumped some mannequins by the side of the road, so he went home. But I think it probably kind of played on his mind. He asked his wife, Marie, if she would basically return with him and come and check out these mannequins. So she did. As they actually got closer to the scene, by all accounts, when Marie realised what it was, she actually fainted. Her and her husband had actually come across the frozen bodies of Barbara and Patricia Grimes. And they were frozen due to the heavy snowfall that had been falling. The couple obviously contacted the police straight away. Barbara and Patricia were naked. Barbara was laid on her left side with her legs slightly up towards her torso. And Patricia was laid on her back with her body over Barbara's head. Police believed that the girls had been driven down and thrown over the guardrail. And they thought that their bodies had been there for around about 2 weeks. And that they'd not been discovered because, like I said, there was heavy snowfall that had only just recently started to melt. The girls' father actually went down to identify them as it was simply too much for the mother. And it must have been so hard for the father to do that. I can completely understand why the mother just couldn't. 160 police officers continued to search the crime scene and the surrounding area. From what I can find, they didn't actually find anything that could definitely be linked to the girls. I've actually found that this search would go on to then be criticised. It wasn't very well organised. There were people there that didn't really know what they were doing and they could have potentially destroyed any evidence that may have been there. Autopsies were carried out and they began to believe that the girls were actually killed within 5 hours from the last time they were actually seen alive. They kind of determined this by the stomach contents, which still had the meals that their mother had cooked them and the snacks that they were known to have been eating that night. The cause of death was ruled as shock and exposure, as basically there was no evidence of anything else. They didn't find any broken bones or anything like that. Most of the wounds on the girls they actually found would be animal, rodents, insects actually causing it post-mortem. They also did a toxicology test and showed that there was no drugs or alcohol in their system at the time. I have seen but cannot confirm that it was initially stated that the Grimes sisters hadn't had any sexual contact before they died, and this would then later be changed to Barbara had likely engaged in sexual intercourse, but they couldn't actually determine if it was consensual or not. And there's also a lot of criticism around the coroner's report and the fact that this was left out initially. And murder was also listed as the cause of death. Later, the chief investigator for the Cook County's coroner office actually disagreed with the coroner's findings, along with the time of death that they came up with. And the coroner did actually get a lot of flack for this, because it seemed to be a botched report. The investigator actually thought that the girls had been kept alive until at least the 7th of January. And this is much later than the coroner had said it was. He also stated that he thought that the wounds to the girls' faces were marks of violence. He stated that both had been sexually assaulted. So kind of his reasoning behind this, when the girls were found, they were found in a layer of ice. Obviously, the snow had been covering them. This allowed the snow to bury them basically. And in his eyes, this could only have happened on the 7th, since prior to that it wouldn't have been cold enough. So to actually get this layer of ice on the body that allowed the snow to cover them, they would have had to have been alive later on. And again, the marks on the face in his eyes was evidence that they had been beaten and murdered. Anyway, regardless of this, the police did have a few suspects. And the most famous of these was Edward Lee Bedwell, who actually confessed to the murders. But there wasn't enough evidence to link him to this, and he later recanted his confession. He stated that he made this confession because he was coerced by the police, and he was actually cleared of any involvement in this case since he was at work at the time. From what I could find, after this, the Grimes sister case went cold. Although, of course, the family still held out hope. It was in 2012 when a retired police officer and author, Raymond Johnson, began looking into a different case, which was the case of Bonnie Lee Scott. And this case shared similarities with the Grimes sisters. Bonnie was 15 years old. Her body was found naked after being suffocated with a pillow in a car. She had similar non-lethal marks on her body, just like those of the Grimes sisters. Then she was dumped less than 10 miles away from where the Grimes sisters were found. The killer then returned a day later to check that Bonnie was still there, and then 3 weeks later went back again, stabbed her and removed Bonnie's head. He said that he didn't know why he did it, he just had the urge to do it. The perpetrator of Bonnie's murder was actually found out to be Charles Leroy Melquest, who was a child killer. Charles went to trial and tried to argue that he was under a hypnotic spell when he gave the confession, but the jury did find him guilty and sentenced him to 99 years in jail. For some reason, he seemingly only served 11 of these years before he was released. He then got married and had children. I'm not really sure as to the reasoning behind why Charles got out so soon. There was a lot of blackmailing and things like that with the government back then. Whether that was something to do with it, I just don't know. But it is very strange that he only served 11 years and then got out, and he was able to have a family and children and a life after he'd taken the life of poor innocent Bonnie, who was only 15-year-old. Even though the police did find similarities, he was never questioned, and his lawyer forbade him from being questioned on the subject. There was also a phone call made to Loretta the day after Bonnie's body was found, and this caller said, "I've committed another perfect crime." This is another one the cops won't solve, and they're not going to blame Bedwell or Barry Cook. Although Charles did in fact die in 2010, this investigator still believes that this case could still be solved. In my opinion, I do think that maybe the sisters were lured into a car, maybe beaten, sexually assaulted, and then killed. I really can't understand why Charles did only serve the sentence that he did. Let me know what you guys think about this case. Do you think that it was Charles that murdered the Grimes sisters? Do you think he was involved, or do you think it was possibly someone else? Anyway guys, that's all I have on the case of the Grimes sisters today, Patricia and Barbara Grimes. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!